Like most things in life, World War II can't simply be painted over in black and white. Not all Germans were Nazis, and not all Nazis were German. In the midst of all the chaos and destruction of World War II, there are naturally many oddities that we don't often hear about and are mostly overshadowed by the macro scale of things during that time and the black and white picture many people like to paint for themselves. In this week's front episode, however, we'll be wiping that canvas clean and adding in a couple of grey strokes, and specifically, we'll be taking a look at Hitler's foreign SS units, where they came from, why they fought, and their ultimate fate. A propaganda staple for the Nazi Party, the elite 5th Panzer SS Division Viking was, as the name suggests, made up primarily of Nordic peoples from Scandinavia. Although these men weren't ethnically German, the volunteers were eagerly absorbed by Nazi Germany and touted as a pride of the SS, with propaganda minister Goebbels hoping to show his citizens that even unaffiliated Nordic supermen were willing to volunteer for the noble cause of Nazism. Well, these die-hard anti-communist Nords did more than just meekly volunteer for the cause. But being an SS division, the brigade naturally committed many atrocities, including the mass slaughtering of Ukrainian civilians, partisans, and Jews when the Viking volunteers were sent to the Eastern Front in 1941. To add to the infamy of this unit, notorious SS Dr. Josef Mengele served directly with the division in its early campaigns, performing his role as a combat medic and receiving an Iron Cross for saving 2 wounded men from a burning tank. As history writes, however, this medic himself was wounded and was absorbed into the concentration camp system, where he continued his work as a sadistic doctor performing vile experiments on the inmate population at Auschwitz. Capitalizing on the absolute political, religious, and ethnic destabilization of the Balkan region of Europe during the 20th century, the Nazis figured it would be a great idea to play into this during World War II and formed an SS unit made up almost entirely from Bosnian Muslims, called the 13th Waffen-SS Mountain Division. Formed in 1943, this SS unit took an oath to both Hitler and the Croatian fascist leader Ante Pavelic, who by himself warrants an entire other video for the atrocities he perpetrated behind the scenes. With that being said, this Muslim SS division were themselves bad enough, fighting in 8 different campaigns around the Balkans and becoming infamous for their heavy-handed treatment of local Serbian and Jewish civilian populations. The unit committed an untold number of war crimes that go mostly unknown due to Germany's prolificness in World War II, but were still not wholly immune from the swift hand of justice in the end. Most of the unit shed their uniforms and deserted in 1945 when they were sent to the Eastern Front. However, 38 officers were eventually captured after the war, and ultimately 10 were executed for their part in committing the war crimes during their tenure in the Balkans. Spain was probably the most politically fearful country in World War II. Headed by the dictator Francisco Franco, he decided it was best to lurk in the shadows and in the grey areas of the war and not openly declare Spain as fascist, as he did not want to aggravate his neighbours and open up Spain to an extremely bloody war with England and her allies. Despite this, Franco was still willing to help out his fascist friend in Germany and allowed the Wehrmacht to set up recruitment depots in the large cities, also encouraging Spaniards to join the Germans. Over 40,000 Spanish and a number of Portuguese ended up initially joining the Wehrmacht 250th Infantry, or Blue Division, where they were sent to the east. They then proceeded to win Hitler's absolute adoration on the Russian front by holding their line despite massive casualties. Hitler referred to them as equal to the best German divisions he had, and greatly respected their courage in battle. In 1943, however, Franco eventually caved into political pressure and recalled what was left of the Spanish fighting force. Thousands ultimately refused to return, and were drafted as the 101st SS Spanish Volunteer Company into the 28th Volunteer Grenadier Division Wallonen, and later into the 11th SS Division, where these fascist Spaniards would fight all the way to the surrender of Germany, with many being captured by the Russians and some not returning home until 1954. Russian history is a beast of its own, and there's no doubt that there were many marginalized Russian groups such as the White Army and those affected by Stalin's Great Terror in 1936 to 1938. One of the results of such a divided society was the formation of SS Sturmbrigade RONA, headed by Russian anti-communist Bronislav Kaminsky. Although the organizational structure of this unit was an absolute mess and the Nazis didn't really know what to do with them, they eventually found a place for them in German security operations around the Baltic states, where, like many SS units, they committed numerous atrocities against the civilian populace. The unit never became an official division, because on the day Himmler was going to sign them in, the Warsaw Uprising began and they were never committed. They were, however, still sent to Warsaw, where they continued to commit war crimes in the name of Nazi Germany, but German High Command eventually got sick of them and executed their leader Bronislav Kaminsky, whilst drafting the remnants of the unofficial SS division into the Russian Liberation Army, which was a corps-sized army made up entirely of Russians sent in to fight with the Axis on the Eastern Front. Many of its leaders were tortured and hung when caught by the Red Army. Equipped with a burning desire to expunge the British from their homeland, the Tiger Legion, or simply Indian Legion, adopted the classic stance of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Made up of prisoners of war, as well as 3,000 Indian expats living in the Third Reich at the time, Infantry Regiment 950, later known as the Indian Volunteer Legion of the Waffen-SS, was proposed to spearhead an Axis invasion of Western India through Afghanistan by way of the Persian Gulf. After the Axis's heavy defeats at the Caucasus by the Soviet Union, however, this initial plan was largely abandoned, and the infantry regiment was transferred to the SS, where it fought in the desperate defense of Germany and her surrounding territories in the Great Retreat from the advancing Allied forces. The unit was ultimately disbanded, and surviving members were sent back to India, where many faced trial for treason by British authorities. Although not many in number, volunteers from the Commonwealth did indeed exist in World War II, primarily under the remote direction of pro-Nazi British fascist John Amory. Known as the British Free Corps, or BFC, the original idea was to persuade Allied prisoners of war to the Nazi cause and use them as propaganda to showcase how even the Western Allies saw the Soviets as a threat. Nazi High Command did indeed go through with this plan, even though the unit never reached more than 27 men in strength, despite numerous recruitment drives under Amory, all of which were complete failures. And the limited number of men who joined, including a couple of Canadians and a couple of New Zealanders, were drafted into a Nordic SS volunteer division and saw action against the Soviets. After the war, one Canadian and one New Zealand soldier claimed they had only joined the Corps to wreck it and to gather intelligence for its ultimate demise, with the exception of the director of the British Free Corps project, John Amory, who we just mentioned, who was hanged in December of 1945 by the British for high treason. So guys, I really do hope you found this video interesting, because I sure found it interesting to research. I did miss out on a couple of Wehrmacht battalions, such as the Arabs who fought for the Wehrmacht and a couple of others, but in general, I'm pretty sure I've covered most bases, so do let me know if I missed any in the comments section below. And just before you go typing the Irish and American renegades who fought for the SS, I will be doing a video on them separately sometime in the future, so if there's any actual units that I missed, please make sure you let me know in the comment section below. And just before you go guys, I want to give a big thank you for just 30,000 subscribers on this channel. It's pretty massive, I'm pretty blown away. And yeah, all I can really say is thanks. I hope you guys continue to enjoy the content. And if you want to support the channel more than you already are by watching this video, then I do have a Patreon linked in the description below. And if you do want to interact with other history buffs, I do also have a Discord where you can chat with them. It's a really fun Discord and they supply me with most of my history memes, so make sure you go check them out guys. Anyways, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.